I hadn't seen Trevor in nearly 4 years, and yet there he was, leaning against his old Jeep at the gas station, arms crossed, same crooked grin I remembered from high school. His hair was longer now, sun-bleached at the ends, and his stubble gave him a rougher edge. But his smile? That hadn't changed. That smile could still knock the wind out of me. "Still always 5 minutes late," he said as I stepped out of my car, tossing my duffel in the back. "Some things never change," I replied, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was already doing that nervous flutter it always did around him. That part hadn't changed either. We'd been best friends since middle school, inseparable until college came around and life tugged us in different directions. I stayed east for school. He went west, chasing forests and mountains and whatever else made him feel alive. We messaged off and on, the kind of scattered friendship that survives on shared memories more than shared time. But a few weeks ago, out of nowhere, he'd texted me. "Want to hike the Rockies? Just like old times." I said yes before I even thought it through. Now here we were, hitting the open road, driving into a landscape that looked more like a painting than a place. Snow-capped peaks stretched out in the distance like jagged teeth, forests blanketing the lower slopes, the sky wide and impossibly blue. It was the kind of view that made you forget about deadlines, phone screens, and everything else you thought mattered. Trevor rolled the windows down and turned the music up. Some indie folk band I didn't know, but immediately liked. The wind tangled my hair, and I laughed without meaning to. "Man, I've missed this," he said, glancing at me. "Us. This." I nodded, a little too quickly. "Yeah, me too." And I had. But what I didn't say, what I hadn't ever said, was how much I missed him. Not just the jokes, the midnight conversations, or the way he always found the best hiking trails. I missed the way being near him made something quiet inside me hum. It had always been there, even when I didn't have words for it. A soft, aching kind of admiration. Maybe more. Back then, I told myself it was just a phase, a crush that would fade. But now, sitting beside him in the passenger seat with the mountains growing closer, I could feel it creeping back in like a half-forgotten song. He tapped the steering wheel in rhythm with the music, his profile lit by sunlight. "I found this old trail I think you'll love. It's kinda hidden. Most tourists don't know about it." "Sounds like your kind of place," I said. "You'll love it too. Trust me." The thing was, I did. I always had. We drove in silence for a while after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that happens when words aren't needed, when the air between two people is filled with history and something else, something that's maybe about to change. I looked out the window at the looming ridgelines and thought, this trip might undo me, and some part of me wanted it to. The trail started steep right out of the parking lot, winding through dense pine forest with loose gravel underfoot. Trevor was already ahead of me, bounding up the incline like he hadn't just spent 6 hours behind the wheel. His backpack looked heavier than mine, but he moved like it weighed nothing. "Still in shape, I see," I called out, breath already coming a little faster. He turned and grinned, that familiar flash of teeth. "You're the one who always made us stop for granola bars every 20 minutes, remember?" I rolled my eyes but smiled. "Still might." We hiked like that for a while, him setting the pace, me trailing close behind. Sunlight filtered through the trees in soft golden shafts, and the only sounds were the crunch of boots, the chirp of birds, and Trevor's occasional humming. He always hummed when he was in a good mood. Eventually, the trees thinned, opening up to a ridge with a view so wide it made my chest tighten. A river wound far below us like a silver thread, and beyond that, the Rockies rose in layers, sharp and endless. "God," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. "You weren't kidding." Trevor handed me his water bottle without asking. Our fingers brushed. Just a second. Barely anything. But it lingered longer in my mind than it should have. He plopped down on a flat boulder, stretching his legs and leaning back on his hands. "Told you, this place clears your head." I sat beside him, close enough that our shoulders nearly touched, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off his skin. We started catching up in earnest then. College stories, ex-roommates, crappy jobs. Trevor told me about a marketing gig he quit after 6 months and a stint working at a wildlife preserve. They had me wrangling raccoons one week, he said, laughing. Can't make that up. You wrangling raccoons? I snorted. That's the most chaotic image I've ever had of you, he grinned. They liked me. Of course they did. You've got that charming woodland prince energy. He raised an eyebrow. Woodland prince? I shrugged, pretending to focus on tightening the strap of my boot. You know? You've got the hair for it. The moment hung between us, just a bit too long. Trevor looked at me for a second, long enough that I felt it, but then he just laughed and stood. Come on, Prince. Trail's not gonna hike itself. We climbed higher after that. The trail narrowed, and at one point, I slipped on a patch of gravel. Trevor grabbed my forearm quickly, steadying me. His grip was firm, fingers warm and strong. For a heartbeat, we were face to face, closer than we'd been in years. You good? He asked. Yeah, I said, trying not to sound breathless. Just got distracted by your woodland aura. He chuckled, but didn't let go right away. By the time we reached the tree line, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon. Shadows grew long across the rocky slope, and the air turned crisp. We found a small ledge and set our packs down, taking in the view. Remember that time in junior year you tried to ask out Ellie Harper by baking her brownies and spelling out her name in walnuts? I said, grinning. Trevor groaned. You promised. You'd forget that. Never. She was allergic to walnuts. And you nearly killed her, I added helpfully. He laughed so hard he had to sit down, tears in his eyes. I couldn't help but laugh too. It felt good, easy, familiar. But beneath the laughter, something unspoken kept tugging at me. A question I hadn't dared ask since we were kids. What if what I felt back then, what I still felt, wasn't one-sided? He wiped his eyes and looked at me again, the fading sun lighting his face in a soft amber glow. I wanted to say something then. Anything. But the words stuck, so instead, I smiled, and he smiled back. The first rumble of thunder sounded low and far off, like a warning whispered into the bones of the mountains. Trevor glanced up at the sky, squinting. That wasn't supposed to happen. The clouds had rolled in fast, thick, dark, and sudden. One moment the sun was dipping warm against our backs, and the next, the wind turned sharp and cold. It kicked up dust and pine needles, sent the trees swaying in a restless hush. We were already high up on the ridge when the first drop hit my cheek, then another. Then a sheet of rain came pouring down like someone had sliced open the sky. Come on, Trevor shouted over the wind, grabbing my wrist. There's cover that way. We ran, slipping, boots splashing through muddy divots. In the trail, until we found a shallow outcropping jutting out from the cliffside, just wide enough to duck under. Water rushed in rivulets off the rock above us, the sound of the storm filling the world like static. We dropped our packs and crouched close together, trying to stay dry. It was laughable. We were already soaked, clothes clinging to skin, hair dripping into our eyes. My jacket felt like a wet rag. My hands were shaking, partly from the cold, partly from adrenaline, and partly from him. Trevor shook his head, water flying from his hair. Well, this sucks, I laughed, teeth chattering. Good to know. Some things never change. Nature always wins. He pulled his jacket tighter, then looked at me. Really looked at me. His brows furrowing slightly. You're freezing. I'm fine, I said too quickly. He ignored that, scooting closer. Here, lean in. You're shivering like crazy. Before I could argue, his arm was around me. I tensed for a split second, every nerve in my body lighting up, then let myself fall into the warmth of him. His jacket pressed against my back. I could feel the solid rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his side against mine, even through all the layers and damp clothes. My heart was a drum in my throat. Better? He asked softly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Rain drummed above us, loud and endless. Wind howled through the trees below. We sat like that for a long time. Just the two of us, curled into each other beneath cold stone and the sound of a mountain storm. His hand rested lightly on my arm, and every time he shifted, even slightly, I felt it like a spark. You always hated storms, Trevor said suddenly, his voice a murmur beside my ear. I smiled faintly. Still do. Remember when we were kids? You used to hide in the closet with a flashlight and your headphones. You used to bring me snacks, I said quietly. He chuckled, and the sound warmed something deep inside me. You always liked peanut M&Ms. They still make them, you know. I know. I brought some, he said, patting his pack. Didn't forget. There was a pause. Not awkward, just loaded. Heavy in the way only silence between us could be. I felt him shift slightly, his hand brushing against the collar of my jacket. You're soaked, he said. Gently, almost too carefully, he reached up and adjusted it, fingers brushing the side of my neck. Then, with surprising tenderness, he swept a strand of wet hair away from my forehead. His knuckles grazed my temple. His eyes lingered. I couldn't breathe. He didn't say anything, just looked at me for a long moment, eyes unreadable, soft, searching. And then he turned his gaze back to the storm, his hand still resting lightly on my arm. And I sat there, heart breaking open and mending all at once. The longing was so loud in my chest it felt like it echoed against the rock walls. I wanted to lean in, to rest my head on his shoulder, to close that last inch between us. But I didn't, because I was afraid that if I crossed that line, I'd lose everything. That one misread moment could shatter the years between us. So I stayed still, letting the silence speak for me, letting the rain blur the edges of my restraint. Trevor didn't move away. By the time the storm passed, the sun was already slipping, behind the ridge, casting long golden shadows across the wet forest floor. Everything smelled of pine and damp earth. We hiked the last mile in silence, tired, damp, and a little raw. Trevor found a clearing tucked beneath a cluster of spruce trees, sheltered enough for the night. We set up camp together, moving with the quiet ease of people who didn't need to speak to coordinate. I handled the tent. He gathered firewood. I lit the fire. He unpacked the food. By the time it started crackling, the night had fully arrived, the sky above us scattered with cold stars. We ate from shared packets of dehydrated meals, the kind that always tasted better after a long day outside. Our boots steamed by the fire. The silence between us was different now. Heavier, maybe, or just fuller. Trevor poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the air. You ever wonder how we ended up where we are? He asked quietly. I glanced over. His face was half shadowed by firelight, the flicker dancing across his cheekbones and the curve of his mouth. What do you mean? He shrugged. I don't know. Just life. I had all these plans and then none of them stuck. Thought I'd be in a relationship by now. Maybe even married. I gave a soft laugh. Same. He looked at me. You ever get close? The question caught me off guard. I hesitated. A couple times. Nothing that lasted. He nodded, thoughtful. Me neither. There was someone in college, sort of. But it didn't go anywhere. And I don't know if it ever could have. Something about his tone shifted. Softer. Almost unsure. Why not? I asked, barely above a whisper. He drew in a breath, then let it out slowly, like he was trying to release something he'd been carrying too long. Because I've always felt different, he said finally. Like I never really knew what I wanted, or who. I'd tell myself I was straight because that's what everyone expected. That's what I was supposed to be. My heart thudded once, sharp and deep. But sometimes, he went on, staring into the fire now, I'd feel something, for someone, and it wouldn't make sense, so I'd push it down, pretend it didn't happen, until it went away, or until I convinced myself it did. The fire cracked. A log split with a soft pop. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My pulse was in my throat. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff again, staring into something wide and unknown. Trevor rubbed a hand over his jaw, the silence between us stretching tight. Sorry, I didn't mean to drop that on you. No, I said quickly. It's okay. I get it. More than you think. He looked at me then, really looked at me. His eyes weren't afraid, just tired, honest. And in that second, I saw it. The same question that had been buried in me for years, the same ache, the same hope. I wanted to reach out, to close the space between us, to just ask. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up a small twig and tossed it into the fire. Watched the flames curl around it. Sometimes I think I've spent half my life hiding from myself, I said quietly, and the other half pretending I'm not. Trevor didn't respond right away, but when he did, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. And what if you stop pretending? I turned toward him. We were close, closer than we'd been all day. His knee brushed mine. Neither of us moved. I don't know, I whispered. I guess I'm scared I'll lose something I care about. He looked down at our knees, still touching. Me too. The fire snapped again. We both looked away, the moment hanging between us like a breath that never landed. He reached forward, poking the fire again, his knuckles white on the stick. I noticed his hand trembling, just slightly. I wanted to touch it. Just place my fingers over his. Tell him it was okay. That we were okay. But I didn't. We sat there like that, suspended in everything we weren't saying. The fire burned low. The night deepened. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Trevor leaned back finally, exhaling slow. We should get some sleep. Yeah, I said, my voice barely holding. As we crawled into the tent, I realized my hands were still shaking, not from the cold. The tent was barely wide enough for the two of us. Our sleeping bags brushed against each other, the thin nylon, walls sagging slightly with the weight of the storm outside now reduced to a quiet drizzle. The fire had long since died. The only light came from the faint glow of the moon filtering through damp fabric, making the whole world feel muted and soft. Trevor lay on his side, facing away. I lay on mine, staring at the slight curve of his back. My heart had been pounding, for what felt like hours. I couldn't sleep. Not after everything he'd said. Not after everything I didn't say. The silence in the tent wasn't empty. It was full. Full of every almost touch, every look, every unspoken word between us. It pressed down on me like a second skin. I thought he was asleep. His breathing had settled into that slow rhythm that usually meant he'd drifted off. But then, he murmured something. Soft. Slurred with sleep. Frank. I froze. My name on his lips like a question, or a thought he hadn't meant to say. Out loud, his hand moved, sliding back across the narrow space between us. Searching. It brushed my arm, tentative, unsure, and stayed there. Not demanding. Not insistent. Just waiting. My chest felt tight, like the moment was too big to breathe through. My mind spun in circles. Maybe he's dreaming. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe this is a mistake. Maybe I'm about to ruin everything. But then his fingers curled slightly. Not gripping, but holding. And something in me broke open. Very slowly, I turned over to face him. My sleeping bag rustled, the movement impossibly loud in the quiet. I was close enough now to feel the warmth of his breath. Close enough to see the crease between his brows, even in the dimness. His eyes were open, barely, but open. Watching me. Neither of us said a word. I lifted my hand. It shook. I didn't try to hide it. I let it settle gently over his, palm to palm. Our fingers tangled instinctively, like they'd been waiting for this shape. He blinked. And then, God, he moved in. It wasn't fast. It wasn't bold. It was a question. His forehead touched mine first, then his nose, and then, finally, his lips brushed against mine. Featherlight, hesitant, like he might pull away any second. I kissed him back. It was clumsy at first. Careful, like we were both terrified of breaking something fragile. But then, it deepened, not in intensity but in meaning. Years of things left unsaid melted into that one soft, trembling moment. Every inch of it felt like a confession. Trevor's hand came up to cup my cheek. His thumb traced just beneath my eye. I don't know if I was crying or if it was just the leftover dampness from the storm, but I didn't care. I didn't hide from it. Not this time. When we finally pulled back, we didn't speak. We just looked at each other, foreheads still pressed. Together, breaths mingling in the narrow space. I wanted to say everything. That I'd thought about this moment for years. That I was scared out of my mind. That I'd loved him in one form or another, since the first time he stood up for me in 7th grade. But instead, I let silence say it for me. Trevor gave a shaky exhale and curled closer, resting his head against my chest like it was the most natural thing in the world. I held him there, arms wrapped around his back, our legs tangled beneath layers of fabric and unspoken things. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even certain. But it was real. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was hiding. We fell asleep like that. Together, warm, scared, and whole. And even though nothing had been said out loud, everything had changed. I woke to the smell of pine and damp canvas, and the faintest glow of morning filtering through the tent wall in soft gold streaks. For a moment, I wasn't sure if it had all been a dream. The storm, the fire, the way Trevor's hand had found mine in the dark. But then I felt him. I, still curled beside me, his arm draped across my waist, his breath warm against my shoulder. He stirred as I shifted, blinking slowly awake. His eyes met mine, and for one heart-clenching second, I braced for it. Regret, confusion, distance. But instead he smiled. Small, sleepy, real. "Morning," he whispered, voice still husky. "Hey," I said back, softer than I meant to. He didn't move away, didn't untangle his arm, just looked at me, like we were still suspended in the quiet magic of last night. I wanted to ask him 100 things. What does this mean? Do you feel what I feel? What now? But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I let silence stretch gently between us. He reached up, hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. His fingers lingered just a second too long. "I'm glad it was you," he said. It was barely more than a whisper, but it hit me like a wave. All the breath I'd been holding finally escaped. "Me too," I murmured. We didn't say anything more after that. We didn't need to. We crawled out of the tent into a world scrubbed clean. The forest sparkled with dew, and mist curled lazily off the treetops. It was the kind of morning that felt like a reset, like the earth itself had taken a deep breath. Trevor boiled water for coffee while I rolled up the sleeping bags. We moved around each other easily, comfortably, occasionally bumping shoulders or brushing arms, letting those tiny moments speak in place of the bigger, scarier things we weren't ready to say. Every time his fingers grazed mine, my heart jumped. Not with fear anymore, but something gentler. Something almost happy. As we packed up camp and hit the trail again, the sunlight broke through the trees in long beams, warming the path ahead. We walked side by side, boots crunching on damp soil, saying little. Sometimes our hands would swing just close enough to brush. Sometimes they didn't pull away. I caught him looking at me once. Eyes soft, thoughtful. He didn't look away when I met his gaze. Just smiled, and I smiled back. I didn't know what would happen after this. Didn't know what words we'd find, or what shape this thing between us would take once we were back in the real world. But in that moment, hiking through golden morning light beside him, I knew one thing. The mountains hadn't broken me. They'd given me something I'd barely dared to hope for. Not just the chance to be close to him, but to be seen by him. Chosen, even in a quiet, uncertain way, and maybe that was enough. For now, that was everything.